Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today I thought we would talk about something a little less political, a little less divisive than the last video I put out, which I got ratioed to hell with. And that's fine, that's fair enough. I don't give a fuck, really. It's okay, you know, people disagree. And it turns out a lot of people in metal disagree with me on things relating to, I don't know, fucking border control and shit like that. So today we're going to talk about something different. We're going to go back to talking about music. I thought we'd talk a bit about Megadeth and their latest record, and David Ellefson, of course, former bass player, but co-founder, importantly, co-founder of Megadeth over 40 years ago. Megadeth, of course, releasing their self-titled album, which promises to be the final album in the band's discography before Dave Mustaine presumably retires from touring under the Megadeth banner. I've had a listen to the record, at least, I would say the first half, maybe the first, I don't know, 6 tracks, something like that, and I've heard the cover, the Ride the Lightning cover. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll talk a little bit about David Ellefson's reaction. You know, I was watching, he has a YouTube channel, so I was watching, he was talking on somebody else's podcast about his initial reactions on listening to the record and some observations and that sort of thing. Those sets of riffs, by the way, that I played in the beginning of the video, that's from an instrumental of mine, and the reason I picked that is because that particular sequence of riffs that come in towards the end of the track are really deeply inspired by early Megadeth. I was really into the 80s Megadeth and early 90s pre-Risk era stuff, particularly up to, I would say, Countdown to Extinction. Cryptic Writings was like okay, but it was, you know, it was a little neutered. But Countdown to Extinction I thought was very, you know, up until then I pretty much, you could have played me almost anything that they had written and I would have been like, yeah, I'll just buy that on principle. So like you could say early Megadeth and early Metallica formed the very basis of like the core influences for me personally, so I was always a fan of both bands. So yeah, I thought we'd get into it and just talk about it a little bit. Obviously the album so far is doing pretty well. It's charted in on the Billboard Top 200, which is a good achievement for any metal record. But particularly, I think, you know, for Megadeth, it's, at least commercially, they seem to be going out very strong. Haven't had a listen to the first, like I said, 5, maybe 6 tracks, something like that. I think albums, you know, they really are. It's not just a marketing thing or a timing thing, but that, you know, the record is really strong. You know, compare it to, say, something like Metallica's 72 Seasons. This is much more committed to, you know, going out with integrity, with balls, with grit, with a bit of speed and punch about it. It is definitely an out-and-out thrash record, which I was pleased to hear. So getting into some of David Ellefson's comments, he made the remarks that to him it didn't sound like a Megadeth record. It sort of didn't have, I don't know, I guess a certain tonality about it. He said it sounded more like a Dave solo project. But I thought it was a little weird because the guy he was talking to, I mean, clearly he made reference to the fact that there are a lot of like Megadethisms in the songs, and I would agree with that. Like, having listened to it, there were certain things that like sort of jumped out of me that were like maybe rhythmic structures or certain sort of like chord progression structures, and sometimes in other places it was sort of like melody type related things. And you know, it's hard to make the claim that it doesn't sound like Megadeth when it has lots of Megadethisms in it. So I thought that one was a little strange. That being said, it definitely sounds much more of a modern Megadeth record, where it's very upfront, more deeply saturated guitars. David Ellefson made an interesting comment about Dirk Verbeuren's drumming, in the fact that he said that he really wishes that they wouldn't quantize him to the grid. So for anyone who's not familiar, quantization, when you record into like Pro Tools or digital audio workstation, you can basically snap the drum beats, or any performance really, but it's mostly used to correct drums, and then obviously all the other instruments are overdubbed to be tight with the drums and corrected if necessary. But basically, so you can have a drum performance, and if like one or two hits are just slightly off the beat or whatever, you can kind of snap them back onto the grid. And it just makes for a faster workflow or a tighter drum sound. So there are reasons why you would use it aesthetically if you really wanted a tight mechanical drum sound. So say something like a band like Fear Factory, they really benefit from using quantization. Now, if you've ever seen Fear Factory live, they are really pretty much that tight, right? But they are human beings, so obviously when a live performance, you're going to get the odd hit here and there that isn't like, 100% perfect or whatever. But because those notes and beats are whizzing by so fast, the audience isn't really dwelling on them, they're just listening to the overall soundscape. But for a record, obviously on repeated listenings, you need that to be 100% in keeping with the tonality of the band. And since Fear Factory is all about that kind of machine, post-apocalyptic Terminator vibe, it needs to be mechanized. For lack of a better term, it needs to sound mechanized. Whereas I get what David Ellefson is saying here, which is it's a different situation in Megadeth, where it's a little bit more like, say, akin to some like the way you might take it with Iron Maiden, right? Iron Maiden famously, Nico McBrain didn't play to a click track. When they're recording, you're listening to his meter that he's keeping, right, as a drummer. So the benefit of that and doing like live tracking is you get these real magical moments where the band can stretch something just behind the beat, just to like build tension into kind of rhythmic patterns and things like that are, it's like a very intangible human quality to it that when you nail it and the performance is really good and really tight, there's a magic in there. And that's something you used to get with older records that were recorded that way. Whereas these days, it's kind of taken as a given that you're going to play the best performance you can, and then you're kind of going to move on, and like there'll be like one or two little things that you tidy up in post. But as part of that process, oftentimes the drums are simply quantized to do that, and it's a very fast way of getting the fundamental editing done. The downside of it is you lose a lot of the human character from it. Now, Derek is such a tight player and such an accomplished player that quantizing him doesn't destroy his performance entirely, because he is just very tight in the first place. But I can understand where David Ellefson is coming from, in that if you let him control the meter, say like a Mike Portnoy would do. Like when he plays live, Mike Portnoy is playing without a click. He is the click for the band. There's something that comes along with that. There is like I said, a human quality of his interpretation of the time, and like I said, there's some magic that can come with that. But it's harder to track that way, because then if you get the live guitar takes and you get them at the same time as that drum take, oh wow, amazing, awesome, the stars aligned. But that hardly ever happens. Usually what happens is you push for the drum take, you get the drum take, and then the guys are going to come in punching guitars later, and it can be quite hard to lock into the original timing when you're not there playing with the guy in the room, or at least looking at the guy while he's playing. You're just listening back to it, through headphones, trying to lock in with what he did, which was unique for that performance. So there's reasons why quantization is used for workflow purposes. There's reasons why it's used for aesthetic purposes. But I get what he's saying. It's Megadeth, and Megadeth has the money and has the time to track drum tracks that are extremely high quality without the need for quantization. And as an aesthetic choice, David Ellefson believes that is more in keeping with old school Megadeth. And in that sense, I would say I probably agree. So while I don't really necessarily, I wouldn't go so far as to agree with the general tonality of the record, On the drum quantization thing, there is a bit of that. Like when you listen to it, it is a little bit. The drums are almost bordering on death metal. You know, they're pushing the boundaries of thrash, and it's only because the song structures don't breach that that it doesn't. It's not like deal breaking. Let's put it that way. Um, but yeah, just into the general tone of things. I mean, his remarks saying that it sounds like a Dave Mustaine solo project. I was trying to wrap my head around what he was getting at. I mean, his favorite track, from what I could make out, was "Let There Be Shred," and that is indeed a really, really kick-ass tune. Very, very speedy, very punchy, very technical. There is indeed a lot of guitar shred playing, and Megadeth's new lead guitar player really, you know, lays down the law and shines there. And to be fair, I think the way he approaches his leads is very much in keeping with the kind of Megadeth sound. I mean, you're never going to sound just like Marty Friedman, you're never going to sound just like Chris Poland, but there are certain idiosyncrasies, scale types and things like that that the band tends to lean on, and he very much stays true to that sort of thing. Now, whether that's under the strict guidance of Mustaine to do that, obviously Mustaine plays his own leads as well, and they're, as you'd expect, you know, they're accomplished and not quite as shreddy tonality-wise as his counterpart. But Dave is an accomplished player. He's a decent, solid lead guitar player, and he has a bit more like sort of bluesy-isms that he would bring in sometimes. And that's there on the record here and there, but there's no overuse of it. There's nothing watered down about that. So it got me thinking maybe David Ellefson is referring to one of the early tracks that's sort of like, I wouldn't quite call it a ballad, it's not that, it's just like a mid-paced kind of rocking tune, if that makes sense. But it's called Hey God, and it's quite I guess the song is like a confession between Dave Mustaine and his maker, and I guess that's because, you know, Dave is obviously getting on now. And he's had some health challenges, and I mean, he's faced death a couple of times before, you know, in his youth with drug abuse and that kind of thing, you know, back in the day. So I guess he's at this point in life where he's really looking back and going, you know, that, you know, in the back of his mind, he knows that there just aren't as many days ahead of him as there were, you know, as there are now behind him. And I actually really like the song. You know, it's very personal. It's very vulnerable for someone like Dave Mustaine. And it's very like kind of first person. And I think maybe that can be a little unsettling for people, especially in metal. And normally it wouldn't be my kind of thing. But I think Dave Mustaine usually, you know, it's not the first time he's done this sort of thing. And I think he's quite good at it because he doesn't really do it in a soppy sort of tone. He does it in a kind of, he just keeps rocking, if you know what I mean. Yeah, so, you know, it's not like this like sulky kind of I'm feeling sorry for myself. But there is definitely the sense of like isolation in the song. It's just him alone with God kind of thing. I know him being a Christian, you know, obviously the religious side of that is kind of important to him. But I think it's universally applicable to anyone who's listening that, you know, inevitably those last few years, they're going to come for us all. And for some of us, it's going to come with short notice. You know, we're going to get like cancer or something, and like we're not going to be the story of like going into remission or whatever. You know, like some people are, you know, they're going to have a shit time of it. But most of us inevitably are going to at least have that thing where we, you know, go, damn, our days are numbered, and the generation that's gone before us, you know, they've all kind of died around me, and you're faced with that thing, that thought of, well, that just leaves us, our generation, we're next, you know? And I think that's kind of where Dave is in that song. And I actually really enjoyed it, but I can understand how maybe Ellefson thinks that that's a little bit too vulnerable sounding for Megadeth. But the reason I say Dave Mustaine has done that before is like, you know, he's written lines like, you know, "Hello me, meet the real me," you know, and now that's much more like mischievous sounding and maybe perhaps a little bit more fun from the audience's perspective. Um, but it's still quite introspective, and it is actually still just as vulnerable, really, when you sit down and read those lyrics. It's still, yeah, you know, put it this way: he's not a stranger to laying himself on the table, you know, laying his guts open on the table a bit for other people to kind of poke at and examine. I think the difference is before is the attitude with which it was done. That people could just kind of go, "Ah, that's really cool," you know, like it's kind of psycho sounding. Because at the time where he was in his life, he was, well, frankly, a bit more psycho. But this track is like, he's much more kind of naked, and it's a very sobering track because he's very sober. So it's like there's no there is no humor to it. There's no levity in that sense. But it is still a rockin' song, and it has a cool groove and things like that. So it's not like I said, you're not going to sit there down in the dumps listening to it. Damn, it is going to make you think, especially if you're a bit older like me and you've been listening to the band on and off for like 30 years or something like that. Then yeah, it's the kind of thing that like starts to hit closer to home. Although I'm like, I don't know, a couple generations I suppose behind Dave. I'm in my 40s, you know, obviously he's in his 60s or something like that. On the subject of the Ride the Lightning cover, I actually thought they did a really, really, really cool job of that. It's really respectful to Metallica's final version of that they committed to record, down to the details of being really, really respectful and tip of the hat to like Kirk Hammett's solos that were committed to the record. Lars's drumming. Obviously Dirk is a very accomplished player. He could have shredded his way all over that track in different places, but instead what they chose to do was do honor to the song as it was completed on the 1984 release. And then just kind of towards the end, there's that little bit of like letting themselves go a little bit and injecting a little bit of like Megadethisms, a little bit of like technicality and a little extra dose of ferocity, which is always something that they've had compared to Metallica. Maybe not so much their early work, but certainly Metallica's later work is more kind of backbeat orientated, less fills, less technicality, kind of stripped down song ideas, that kind of thing. But anyway, I just thought it was really cool, really, really nice tip of the hat. Vocals sound great on it. It's very, very tight sounding. I think Dave's voice as well, I should say sounds really good for his age. There's a raspiness to it that I think is kind of interesting. The timbre that he sings in is not quite as high sounding as it was when he was younger, but there is a nice kind of seasoned, rough quality to it that I quite enjoy. So far, I've really enjoyed the record. I don't know that Ellefson's, all of his comments are kind of warranted. Maybe he's a little too close to it, if that makes sense. It's maybe hard for him to listen with an unbiased ear, having been in the band and having helped form the band and all that kind of thing. Although I do genuinely think that he's being genuine with his comments and he's not going out of his way to be biased. I just think there's a natural inherent bias that he can't really get rid of. To me, this record sounds a little bit more closer to traditional Megadeth than some of the previous modern records have. But ultimately, that band has kind of broadened their sound over the years in different periods and pushing slightly in different directions with different things. They never really drifted too far from the core of, I think, of what makes Megadeth. But I'd be interested to know your take in the comments, because this stuff is really subjective. So yeah, let me know what you think, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye bye, guys.